welcome to DCF Investigations. The year is 1968. The city is Glasgow, Scotland. It is a place of hard edges, industrial clamor, and the kind of bone-deep dampness that seems to seep into the very soul of the architecture. In the late 60s, Glasgow was a city in transition, caught between the Victorian grimness of the tenement slums and the rising concrete brutalism of modern redevelopment. But amidst the soot and the struggle, there was a pulse. There was a rhythm that drew thousands of people out of their cramped homes and into the neon glow of the night. It was the era of the dance hall. For the young women of Glasgow, the dance halls were more than just venues for entertainment. They were sanctuaries of glamour, all places where the drudgery of factory work or the isolation of domestic life could be washed away by the swell of a brass band and the promise of romance. The most famous of them all was the Barrowland Ballroom. With its spinning-colored stars and the scent of cigarette smoke and cheap perfume hanging heavy in the air. The Barrowland was the beating heart of the city's social life. But in the shadows of this vibrant scene, something dark was waiting. A predator was stalking the dance floor, hiding in plain sight, wearing the mask of a gentleman while harboring the heart of a monster. He would come to be known by a name that terrified a generation, a moniker that fused the sacred with the profane. They called him Bible John. Tonight, we are going to walk the rain-slicked streets of 1960s Glasgow. We are going to peel back the layers of a 50-year-old mystery that remains one of the most chilling, unsolved cases in British criminal history. We will examine the lives of the three women whose futures were stolen, the terrifying psychological profile of the man who hunted them, and the labyrinthine investigation that failed to bring him to justice. We will look at the suspects, the conspiracies, and the lingering question of whether a serial killer managed to escape the law, or if he has been hiding in the ledgers of other crimes all along. To understand the Bible John murders, one must first understand the atmosphere of the time. 1968 was a year of global upheaval. But in Glasgow, the concerns were local and immediate. The city was tough. It was a place where community meant everything, nights where doors were often left unlocked, and where people looked out for their neighbors. However, it was also a city with a violent underbelly. Religious sectarianism divided neighborhoods, and street gangs fought territorial wars. Yet, the crimes that were about to unfold were different. They were not born of drunken brawls or gang feuds. They were cold, calculated, and terrifyingly intimate. The nightmare began on the night of February 22nd, 1968. Patricia Docker, a 25-year-old nurse, decided to go out for a night of dancing. Patricia was a woman navigating a difficult chapter in her life. She was a mother to a young son and was separated from her husband, living back home with her parents in the Langside area of Glasgow. On that Thursday evening, she told her parents she was going to the Majestic Ballroom on Hope Street. The Majestic was known for a slightly older, more refined crowd compared to the raucous energy of the Barrowland. But for reasons that remain unknown, or perhaps simply on a whim, Patricia ended up at the Barrowland Ballroom later that night. The Barrowland was packed. It was an over-25s night, a weekly event that attracted singles, the separated, and the lonely. We can imagine Patricia there, perhaps wearing her favorite dress, hoping for a break from the stresses of single motherhood and her demanding job. She was a petite, dark-haired woman, described by those who knew her as gentle and caring. She loved to dance. It was her escape. But that night, the escape turned into a trap. Patricia left the Barrowland Ballroom late, where the exact time she left and who she was with remains a point of frustration in the timeline. But what we do know is that she never made it home. The following morning, a man on his way to work walked past a lock-up garage in Carmichael Lane, just a few hundred yards from Patricia's home. It was a cold, gray morning. There, in the doorway of the garage, he found the body of Patricia Docker. The brutality of the scene was stark. Patricia had been strangled. Her body was naked, her clothes found piled nearby. Her handbag was missing, along with her watch. But there was a disturbing detail that would become a hallmark of this killer. There was no evidence of sexual assault in the traditional sense. The violence seemed focused on the act of strangulation itself, a need to extinguish life rather than to rape. The police were immediately baffled. Why was she so close to home? Had she been walked to her door by a suitor who turned on her? The initial investigation into Patricia Docker's murder was hampered by a lack of communication and the social stigmas of the time. Because she was a separated woman out dancing, some officers harbored prejudiced views that perhaps she had invited trouble. It is a tragic and recurring theme in the history of crime against women. Furthermore, the police did not immediately link the crime to a serial predator. They viewed it as an isolated incident, a date gone wrong, or a robbery turned violent. The investigation grew cold quickly. The clues were sparse. No one at the Barrowland could recall exactly who Patricia had left with. The city mourned, her family was shattered, but life in Glasgow moved on, while the music at the Barrowland kept playing. 18 months passed. The fear that had sparked after Patricia's death had begun to fade, replaced by the daily grind of life. But the predator had not gone away. He was merely waiting, or perhaps he was suppressing his urges until they became undeniable once again. On August 15th, 1969, the darkness returned. Jemima McDonald, a 32-year-old mother of 3, prepared for a night out. Like Patricia Docker, Jemima was a regular at the Barrowland Ballroom. She lived in the East End of Glasgow, a hard-working woman who loved the camaraderie and the music of the dance hall. That Friday night, she dressed with care and headed to the Barrowland, joining the throngs of people looking for connection, and witnesses would later recall seeing Jemima in the company of a man that night. He was described as a well-dressed figure, aged between 25 and 35, with short, reddish-fair hair. He was tall, slim, and spoke with a polite, well-spoken local accent. This description was generic enough to fit thousands of men in Glasgow, yet specific enough to later form part of a terrifying composite. The two were seen leaving the ballroom together around midnight, walking into the cool August air. Jemima never returned to her children. As the hours turned into days, her family's panic grew. It was her own sister, Margaret, who heard rumors of children talking about a body in a derelict tenement building on McKeith Street. Driven by a sickening dread, Margaret went to the building herself. It was a crumbling structure, typical of the buildings slated for demolition during that period. Inside, amidst the rubble and decay, Margaret found her sister. Jemima McDonald had been strangled with her own stocking. She was found fully clothed, but her undergarments had been torn. Like Patricia Docker, she had been menstruating at the time of her death, a detail that forensic psychologists would later obsess over. Was this a trigger for the killer? Did he discover this during a romantic encounter and fly into a rage? Or was he a sadist who specifically targeted women in this condition? The similarities to the Docker case were now impossible to ignore. Both women had been at the Barrowland. Both were strangled near their homes. Both were mothers. Both had their handbags taken. The police realized they were dealing with a serial killer. The press began to swirl, and a sense of unease settled over the dance halls of Glasgow. But the killer was not finished. He was escalating. He was becoming more confident, more brazen, and soon he would reveal the strange, religious obsession that would give him his name. The final and most pivotal chapter in this gruesome trilogy began on Halloween night, October 31st, 1969. Helen Puttock, a 29-year-old mother, went to the Barrowland Ballroom with her sister, Jeannie Williams. This night is the most well-documented because Jeannie Williams survived to tell the tale. She spent hours in the company of the man who would kill her sister, and her testimony provides the most chillingly detailed portrait of Bible John. The sisters arrived at the ballroom, ready for a night of fun. The atmosphere was electric. Early in the evening, they met two men, both named John. To distinguish them, one became known as Castle Milk John, named after the area he was from, and the other, the man who stayed with Helen, would simply be John. This second John was different. He was tall, around 5'10", with reddish hair and overlapping front teeth. He was dressed impeccably in a well-cut suit, a shirt and tie, and looked more like a professional than a laborer. The group spent the evening dancing and talking. However, Jeannie noticed something odd about Helen's companion. He was polite, yes, but he was also distant, almost aloof. He didn't seem to be enjoying the revelry in the same way as everyone else. He abstained from alcohol, a rarity in the Glasgow social scene, and seemed to observe the crowd with a critical, almost judgmental eye. At the end of the night, around 1 or 2 in the morning, the group left the ballroom. Castle Milk John walked to catch a bus, leaving Helen, Jeannie, and the other John to find a taxi. They hailed a cab to take Jeannie home to Knightswood first, before dropping Helen and John off at Scottstoun, where Helen lived. It was during this taxi ride that the killer's mask slipped, revealing the fanatical mind beneath. As the taxi wound its way through the dark, rain-swept streets of Glasgow, the conversation took a strange turn. The man began to speak about religion. He didn't just mention it casually. He quoted scripture. He spoke of Moses and the reeds. He referenced specific stories from the Old Testament with the ease of a scholar or a preacher. But it wasn't a sermon of love. It was a sermon of judgment. He criticized the morals of the current generation. He spoke about adulterous women, his tone hardening. He made a comment that would chill investigators for decades. When the topic of the upcoming New Year celebrations came up, he said, "I do not drink at Hogmanay. I pray." He also mentioned details about his father, saying that his father believed dance halls were dens of iniquity. It was a bizarre contradiction. Here was a man who frequented the very place he claimed to despise. Picking up women he seemed to view with moral contempt. Jeannie Williams sat in the taxi, listening to this man berate the world with biblical references, feeling an increasing sense of unease. He was articulate, he was sober, and he was terrifyingly intense. The taxi arrived at Jeannie's home in Knightswood. She got out, watching as the cab pulled away with her sister Helen and the man still inside. offered it was the last time she would see Helen alive. The next morning, Helen Puttock's body was found in the back garden of her tenement flat in Earl Street, Scotstoun. She had been strangled. She was semi-naked. The contents of her handbag were scattered, but the bag itself was taken. Grass stains on her feet suggested a struggle. The killer had walked her to her very home, or at least very close to it, before ending her life. The discovery of Helen Puttock sent shockwaves through Scotland. The police now had a witness, Jeannie Williams. She was brought in and interviewed extensively. Her description of the man was vivid. She recalled his overlapping teeth, his reddish hair, his suit, and most importantly, his obsession with the Bible. The press seized on this detail immediately. Margaret, the headlines screamed the name that would become legend: Bible John. The investigation that followed was one of the largest in Scottish history. The police were under immense pressure. They had a clear description and a specific modus operandi. They knew he frequented the Barrowland. They knew he was likely local or knew the city well. A composite sketch was created by artist Lennox Patterson, based on Jeannie's description. The image of the red-haired young man with the intense stare was plastered on every lamppost, police station, and newspaper in the country. It became one of the most famous police sketches of all time. Detectives flooded the dance halls. Undercover officers, both male and female, mingled with the crowds at the Barrowland, hoping to spot the man with the overlapping teeth. They danced, they drank, and they watched. Every man who looked sideways at a woman, every man who quoted a scripture, every man with red hair was a suspect. Over 50,000 statements were taken. Thousands of men were interviewed. It was a dragnet of unprecedented scale. But there was a problem. In 1969, police work was analog. There were no computers to cross-reference data. The investigation relied on index cards, handwritten notes, and human memory. The sheer volume of information became a hindrance. A suspect might be interviewed by one team and cleared, while another team might have found a vital clue connecting him to the crime. But the two pieces of information never met in the chaos of the paper trail. Furthermore, the description, while specific, also had its flaws. Jeannie had been tired and perhaps had consumed alcohol. Memory is malleable. Was his hair truly red? Or was it the lighting of the Barrowland and the street lamps? Was he truly quoting the Bible accurately, or just rambling? The police chased down every lead. They investigated theological colleges, suspecting he might be a failed priest. They investigated the military, wondering if he was a soldier stationed nearby. They looked at golfers, because he had mentioned a hole-in-one during the taxi ride. One of the most tantalizing leads came from the taxi driver who drove the trio that fateful night. He confirmed the conversation about religion. He remembered the man's face. But despite this corroboration, the man himself, this John, seemed to have vanished into thin air. It was as if he was a phantom who existed only in the neon twilight of the Barrowland ballroom. As the months turned into years, the case grew cold. The dance halls remained open. But the atmosphere had changed. Women traveled in packs. Fathers and brothers waited outside to escort them home. The specter of Bible John hung over the city like a fog. We must now delve into the suspects, the men who have been accused, investigated, and in some cases, exhumed in the hunt for the truth. For decades, the primary theory was that Bible John was a local man who perhaps moved away or was incarcerated for another crime. But in the mid-90s, A new lead emerged that brought the case back into the spotlight. Investigating officers began to look closely at a man named John Irvine McInnes. McInnes was the cousin of one of the original suspects. He had been interviewed at the time of the murders, but was cleared. However, modern review of the files showed inconsistencies. He had been a soldier. He frequented the Barrowland, and he bore a resemblance to the sketch. McInnes had committed suicide in 1980, taking his secrets to the grave. In 1996, in a dramatic turn of events, the Crown Office authorized the exhumation of John Irvine McInnes's body from a cemetery in Stonehouse, South Lanarkshire. Forensic science had advanced light years since 1969. Scientists hoped to find a DNA match. They had obtained a DNA profile from a semen stain found on Helen Puttock's clothing. The nation held its breath. Was this the moment? Had the monster been lying in a quiet grave for 16 years? The results were inconclusive. There was not enough viable DNA to definitively prove McInnes was the killer. But the Crown formally stated there was insufficient evidence to link him to the crimes. His family was left distraught by the intrusion, and the case remained officially unsolved. But then, a darker, more sinister figure entered the frame. A man whose known crimes were so heinous that he became the prime suspect in the eyes of many criminologists and senior police officers. His name was Peter Tobin. Peter Tobin was a serial killer convicted in the 2000s for the murders of Angelica Kluke, Vicky Hamilton, and Dinah McNichol. His crimes were brutal, sexually motivated, and involved hiding bodies. When detectives began to look into Tobin's past, the parallels with Bible John were chilling. In the late 60s, Peter Tobin lived in Glasgow. He was in his 20s. He frequented the dance halls. He met his first wife at the Barrowland Ballroom. He was a man of deep, twisted religious contradictions, often acting moralistic while committing unspeakable acts. Physically, he bore a striking resemblance to the Lennox Patterson sketch. He had the same dark, wavy hair which could appear reddish in certain lights, the same sharp features. He even had a tooth gap that he later had fixed, but the connections went deeper. Tobin had a history of violence against women that dated back to his youth. He had moved to Brighton shortly after the Bible John murders stopped. A classic behavior of a serial killer cooling off or fleeing the heat. Furthermore, one of his aliases was Semple, and he had lived on a street that intersected with the locations of the Bible John crimes. Criminologist David Wilson has been a vocal proponent of the theory that Peter Tobin was Bible John. He argues that the modus operandi, strangulation, sexual sadism, the taking of trophies, matches Tobin's profile perfectly. Tobin also reacted violently when asked about Bible John in prison, reportedly telling a psychiatrist that he was Bible John, although this confession is hearsay and never officially recorded. However, the official police stance remains cautious. DNA evidence from the Bible John case has degraded over time. When Tobin was arrested, samples were compared, but the results were not definitive enough to charge him. Tobin died in prison in 2022, taking whatever he knew to his grave. He was a man who loved control, and denying the families the closure of a confession was his final act of power. There are other theories, of course. Conspiracy theories abound in a case this old and this high profile. Some believe Bible John was a police officer himself, which is why he was able to evade capture so effectively. This theory suggests he knew how to avoid leaving fingerprints and knew the patrol routes. The well-spoken nature of the suspect and his authoritative demeanor in the taxi lend some weight to this, though there is no hard evidence. Others believe he was a Mason, protected by a secret network of influential men in Glasgow. The reference to aprons and specific phrases used in the taxi have been analyzed by some as Masonic code, though this is largely speculative. Then there is the theory that there was no single Bible John. Some investigators have suggested that the 3 murders were committed by different men, and the police, in their desperation, linked them together under one convenient moniker. They argue that the gap between the first and second murder suggests different perpetrators. However, the similarities, the Barrowland connection, the strangulation, the menstruation, the theft of handbags, are so specific that the multiple killer theory is widely disregarded by profilers. We must also consider the possibility that Bible John simply stopped. Did he find a partner who satisfied his urges? Did he have a religious epiphany that curbed his violence? Or did he emigrate to Australia or Canada, as many Scots did in that era, carrying his dark passenger to a new continent? There are cold cases in other countries that bear striking resemblances, but no definitive link has ever been established. Today, the legacy of Bible John is a scar on the city of Glasgow. It changed the way women lived. It ended the innocence of the dance hall era. The Barrowland Ballroom still stands, a legendary music venue now, but the ghosts of Patricia, Jemima, and Helen still linger in its history. The investigation is technically open, but it is dormant. The police review the files periodically, hoping for a leap in forensic technology that could extract a full DNA profile from the degrading evidence. But with each passing year, the likelihood of a legal resolution diminishes. The witnesses are passing away. The suspect, if he is not Peter Tobin or John McInnes, is likely dead or extremely elderly. But we tell this story not just to hunt a ghost, but to remember the women. Patricia Docker, the nurse who just wanted a night off. Jemima MacDonald, the mother who loved to dance. Helen Puttock, the young woman who shared a taxi with a monster when they were vibrant, living parts of a community, and their lives were extinguished by a man who used scripture to justify his hatred. As we conclude this deep dive, we are left with the chilling reality of the unsolved. Somewhere in the history of Glasgow, a man walked away from 3 murders. He lived a life. He may have raised children. He may have sat in a church pew every Sunday, listening to the very words he quoted to his victims. The mask never slipped again, or if it did, no one lived to tell the tale. This has been a DCF Investigations special report. We have walked the timeline, examined the evidence, and stared into the face of the composite sketch that haunted a nation. Now, I turn the question to you. Do you believe Peter Tobin was Bible John, and the police simply couldn't prove it in time? Or is the true killer a man whose name has never been whispered in an interrogation room, a shadow who got away with the perfect crimes? Think about the taxi ride. Think about the scripture. Think about the silence that has lasted for 50 years. Let us know your theories in the comments below. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and join us next time as we shine a light into the darkest corners of criminal history. This is DCF Investigations, signing off.